Roberta.
Okay, I'm going to go live on YouTube, everyone.
All right, so hi everybody. It's great to have you all here to have another meeting of our Equity Advisory Group. I'm gonna start with a couple of announcements and then kind of walk through a little bit about what we're gonna do tonight. So next slide, please. We have closed captions in English and Spanish. English closed caption, oops, that's not the slide, there we go. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. So it's ibr.news/captions. Okay, that's ibr.news, NEWS/captions. Next slide. How to access closed captions on your Zoom. So you go to audio settings. At the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen. So you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen where it says closed captions is available, closed captions CC, click that, and you should have closed captions on your screen. Okay, next slide. Public input instructions. There will be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today. To submit input after the meeting, email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org with EAG Public Comment in the subject line, or call 888-503-6735 and state EAG Public Comment in your message. Okay, so for today's agenda, we're going to have some remarks from our program administrator, Greg Johnson. We're going to have an update on our IBR Interstate Bridge program and advisory group activities. We'll talk about our equity definition and give a status update on where we're at with that. Informing the equity critical objective in the vision and values, which is very exciting and important work that our committee is going to move on, and building our equity framework, and then wrap up. So we have a lot to do in the next 2 hours. Next slide. So I want to pass to Greg Johnson, our program administrator, to talk with us about where we are right now in the project and how he sees us moving forward. Greg?
Thank you, Roberta. Good afternoon, everybody. And this is my opportunity to let you understand certain things that have been happening over the last couple of months. As many of you know, we have been in a long and constant conversation with our federal partners, both at Federal Transit Administration and Federal Highway Administration, regarding purpose and need. And we are probably at the 90% conclusion point of that conversation. And the feedback that we are getting, and this is a conversation that has gone all the way to to Washington, D.C. for legal consultation and advice. So what we're getting back is that the language changes that we're looking to make in purpose and need more than likely will not be acceptable. They will not pass legal sufficiency standards. So we're still working. We're having our last conversations and waiting for their last feedback on this issue. But the alternative avenue that they've given us, which once again is a positive, is in the critical objectives, where we can be very specific and granular to the objectives that we're looking to achieve in both equity as well as climate related to this program. So I want to thank everybody who put in a ton of time, who have submitted language that we have carried forward. But once again, it looks like that is not going to be the language that is going to be acceptable by the Federal Highway Administration or Federal Transit Authority. So once again, in the purpose of, or in the essence of being transparent, we want to make sure that everybody understands that. But what it doesn't do is lock us out of a focus on critical objectives and actionable objectives related to equity and climate. So where we put it in the document is not the important thing, but the important thing that it is in the document, and that folks will be held responsible for language that that this group helps craft going forward. So that's the major bit of news that's going on. We're still waiting to talk to the bi-state legislative group. As you know, they are in session on both sides of the river, so we're trying to find some time to get with those folks and bring them up to speed. But the program is still moving forward, and once again, looking to the critical objectives, so folks will have the opportunity to weigh in on specific actionable items. So with that, I'll take any questions that that folks on the team may have. I see Steve Nakana.
No question for me, sorry.
Lily and Matthew Sears. So Lily?
This is Lily Copenhagen. Thank you for the update, Greg. What are the next steps then? That's my first question for us. I mean, I know that there are continuing conversations in other spheres, but what are the next steps for us? And can you, whether in this meeting or somewhere else, can you tell us a little bit more about the specific bits of language that are not acceptable so that we don't keep suggesting the same stuff that won't fly?
So
that's it.
So a couple things. The first part of your question is, we are looking to move to specific vision and value language, as well as language wrapped around critical objectives. And once again, that's where I think the meaningful action is at, to where this group can weigh in with critical items that they want to see that reflect equity, racial justice in our program. So you're going to see a shift to that focus yet in this meeting, to start looking at what are critical objectives and where they will fit into the program. And as far as the language, this is wrapped around that we have had a federal record of decision for for this program, and changing the record of decision is once again, or changing the purpose and need, you start to unravel the record of decision and you get sent back to square one, which is an unacceptable outcome. So we are looking to still get the robust language that we're looking for both equity and climate, but just in a different part of the environmental document. So right now, what they've told us is that we would be in legal jeopardy potentially with certain changes in language and purpose and need.
So I just wanted to just be clear, when you talk about critical objectives and equity and climate, you are specifically referring to environmental impacts, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you talk about a federal record of decision, I think myself and maybe other folks on the call aren't really that familiar with what you mean by that. So is there like a written opinion or some sort of written decision that the committee could refer to in terms of, you know, trying to avoid future missteps or trying to, you know, make us likely to appease the federal oversight?
So we are in a somewhat unique position in that this program to replace a bridge across the Columbia had been studied before for 10 years, had received the federal action or the final federal approval before funding starts going is called the record of decision. And that's what we are shooting for as we move forward, a record of decision that reflects all of the changes that we have brought forward, and to make sure that that part of the documentation process is completed. So if this were a brand new project, there might be a different look at the potential of language, even though even that might not be something that would be totally acceptable. But with this being a project that already had a federal action, a federal record of decision, it makes the ability for us to go back and change purpose and need language the door for that to be very narrow.
So just to be clear, basically, if you were to fiddle with the wording or language that's already been baked in by the record of decision, you'd have to go back and get a new record of decision and start from the beginning. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that Angela and Chris, who are on the line, if I'm saying anything that's incorrect, they will jump in and kick me under the virtual table and put the right words out. So Angela or Chris, if you guys have anything to add.
Hi, this is Angela. I think what we're trying to say or trying to explain, the record of decision is the endpoint of the NEPA process for the past planning work, where they developed their purpose and need, they evaluated a range of alternatives, and then the record of decision is the document that formalizes the selection of the preferred alternative. Now, moving forward, we have the opportunity to take a look at whether there are new solutions or new design options that should be considered, and we can handle those in basically kind of an amendment, if you will, to the record of decision that was previously that is on the record. So there is an opportunity to still make changes, but we need to stick with the original needs statement, purpose and need statement. But that doesn't, in the question that that I think Lily, you ask, is what language should change, or how do we, and what Matthew asks is how do we avoid missteps, is all we're doing, as Greg said, is we are trying to focus other elements of the program, other documents of the program, to clarify how we identify goals or objectives that are set for bringing equity into the program, and how do we ensure that those goals are carried out. And we can do that outside of the purpose and need document. Hope that helps.
I think Roberta is having some internet issues, but Lily, you got your hand up.
Thank you. I guess it sounds like a part of my confusion might be, it sounds like from what some things, sorry, let me try this again. It sounds like a new purpose, a revised purpose and need statement was submitted from us, and there's been some feedback that that revision is not acceptable. Maybe I'm the only one in the group that's confused by this, but I didn't realize that we had submitted a revised purpose and need statement. I thought we were still looking at the purpose and need statement, and we're going to send you our thoughts on that. But it sounds like you've already submitted a thing, and it's been, the changes that you submitted have been rejected. Is that accurate? That might clarify things
So
here.
what we have taken, we've been having conversations, both EAG and CAG, on purpose and need, as well as in the ESG and the staff level groups. We have been taking language on purpose and need over the last approximately month and a half. So we have been taking that language to Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Authority for their reaction to it. We have not taken an exact final language to them, but we've been taking language as it's been submitted to us and different ideas, different concepts of the language to them to get their reaction as we move forward. And right now, they are coming back and letting us know that we would put ourselves in legal jeopardy by taking this language forward, or we would be asked to step back to square one. So all the final language has not been taken forward, but the essence of language that folks have wanted to see in this purpose and need has been taken forward to the federal agencies.
Okay, maybe that's, so my confusion that I don't know what language has been brought forward is because I don't know what language you've brought forward. So maybe, or have you shared that with, sorry if I missed something that you shared with us. Did I miss something,
Yeah.
Jake? Jake's nodding.
No,
Yep, missed something.
well,
Okay, Johnell.
yeah,
Okay.
I sent it out, the latest draft sent out last week, along with the slides for this. Yeah, go ahead, Johnell.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to say the basis of the language that was submitted to the feds, of course, which were preliminary language, resulted both from conversations we've been having with the AG. You'll recall at our last meeting and the meeting prior to that, we've been asking you a series of questions to weigh in on various elements concerning purpose and need, vision and values. And so the program has attempted to synthesize some of those themes and integrate it into language for purpose and need. That's a document that Jake had emailed to all of you. What we were planning to do at today's meeting was to spend more time on the document that we submitted to the federal government to further refine it. But given the guidance that we've heard from our federal partners that that would essentially not result in any positive outcome, what we like to do is spend time focused on the critical objectives, which are going to be important to help guide the program towards the equity performance measures. And so ultimately, what we've learned from our federal partners is there is no legal basis by which they could advance climate or equity language in a purpose and need without it potentially being litigated and thrown out in court. Because again, as we all recall, this is NEPA is very sort of regulated from the perspective of law. And near as we can tell nationally, equity nor climate has ever, in the way that we have been wanting to, has ever been successfully integrated into purpose and need. So it's been an iterative process, Lily. I hope that answers your question.
Kind of. So the version that we have most recently that says draft is not a draft. That was submitted for feedback to the federal agencies that you're working with. And we've now learned that that is not a thing that can be modified. And so it's not a draft that we should present more feedback on. Is that accurate?
Lily, it was still a draft. It was not final language, but we took that draft language to the federal agencies for their response to it. And once again, it's made its way all the way up the ladder, all the way up to the legal councils in DC to give us feedback on what this means.
Would it be fair to say we got to revise and resubmit?
We will have to submit language that is acceptable for purpose and need. That's why we are now focusing on critical objectives as a way to get the language that will hold everyone accountable for the things that are deemed to be important by this group, by the community advisory group. That's why we are looking at that rather than trying to shoehorn something into purpose and need that will end up failing and starting us back at square one.
And with that, Roberta, unless there are more questions, I know we're running just a little bit behind here and want to make sure that we can get to the elements that we really can help steer.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Johnell, because my computer went off, how about our program updates? If you can give us a brief overview of what's happening with the Executive Steering Committee and the Community Advisory Group and purpose and need.
Great. Next slide, please. It's just a quick update from the Executive Steering Group. They last met on March 17th, where they had an opportunity of reviewing and providing feedback on the draft purpose and need. As of course, all of this occurred prior to the federal conversation that Greg referenced, as well as community vision, critical objectives and values, including initial summary of input received from the community engagement activities and initial input from EAG and CAG. At each ESG meeting, we provide kind of an overview of what we've been hearing at both EAG and CAG. They emphasize the importance of including equity and climate change in the draft language. They continue to work together to highlight regional priorities and address constituent interests in the working draft language and voice their appreciation for all of the input that all of you have been providing. CAG, EAG, as well as the community engagement. We've received over 10,000 responses to the survey. And that's in large part because of the significant outreach that has occurred by both of our committees. So thank you for that. And they also indicated looking forward to seeing their continued feedback incorporated into the language. The upcoming meetings are April 29th and May 20th. They'll receive an update. Greg is checking in with ESG partners, informing them of sort of the recent dynamics with our federal partners. Next slide, please. Quick update on Community Advisory Group. Had, again, additional conversation on purpose and need, vision and values. They met, I think it was last week, where they've had an opportunity of reviewing the draft that we were prepared to discuss today. They also had breakout group discussions, and they were encouraged to see their input reflected in the newest draft. They will have another meeting on April 28th. We also spent some time starting to form the charter for the Community Advisory Group, and they had some good discussion with respect to how they want to really operate as a committee. We'll be moving forward and looking at kind of what's next, having critical listening sessions as well as working groups, and then of course adopting the CAG charter. Next slide. Jake, I'm turning it back over to you.
All right. Cool. So as we talked about, and I'm actually going to stop screen sharing for a sec. Talked about the equity definition and brought you guys an initial draft of that at our last meeting. We formed a small subgroup to dive into that further. We heard from you that there needed to definitely be a lot of changes to it. So I'm going to have Lily, who's a part of that group, give kind of a summary of that. Lily, take it away.
Very good. And group members, please jump in as you see fit. So we took a step back from the definition that was drafted and talked about what was important to us to get into the equity definition. Some highlights of that conversation are that access is not enough, and that the idea of equitable access doesn't recognize existing barriers that might not be appreciated at each level of the project. We also talked about how equity needs to be defined in a historical context and not just in a start from scratch, ready, go kind of a perspective, but that a truly equitable perspective would take into account past exclusions and injuries. Nicotrus, I'm trying to come up with other words for harm that aren't the word harm, so feel free to jump in and help me out there. And that if we are going to attempt to improve the long history of inequitable treatment, access, and opportunities in our area, we need to be targeted in our efforts, and those efforts need to have specific goals and to define specific harms that we are trying to, past harms that we are trying to address. We were very interested in making an equity definition that future decisions can be bounced off of. So one that might allow at inflection points along the project's lifespan, folks could say, does this meet the opportunity that's defined in the equity definition to direct resources, opportunities, tangible outcomes to the individuals who have been excluded and maligned in the past and currently. We wanted to go farther than just encouraging folks to be heard being heard and being at the table is important, but that's not the same as having influence and decision-making power. And we wanted to emphasize that. We've got a new draft that we are working on, but it's not quite ready for sharing with the group yet, but we are going to continue working on it. We've got some challenges in our existing draft that we're trying to work around to make it something that will actually be implementable, but also something that stands by our values and our intent. That's what other members of the group. Jake, you were there. How'd I do? Nicotris? I don't see. I got it. All right. Cool.
Matt or Nicotris.
Yep. Great job, Lily.
Oh, good. There you are. Hi, Matt. I didn't see you down there. Okay. Thank you.
It also makes sense to me. That I think you captured it great.
Cool. Thanks, Lily. Roberta.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm excited. I'm excited to read what you all come up with. It feels robust, which is what we're wanting. All right. So we now get to work with Angela Fendley, the environmental lead for our project. And she's going to walk us through the purpose and need and critical objectives and vision and values. All right, Angela.
All right, thanks, Roberta.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we spent a little bit of time already in this meeting talking about the purpose and need. And I just want to reiterate that it has been really helpful, and the input that we have received from both the EAG and the community advisory group, as well as our executive steering group. We've spent the last couple of months asking what has changed since the prior planning effort in terms of needs for the project, in terms of the values the community holds and wants, outcomes and processes improved or changed. It's been very valuable, and there is still plenty of places in the environmental process, the design process that follows, and all the way through construction as well, to integrate some of the topics that and the input we've received from this group on equity and others from climate. And so, as Greg mentioned, even though we've kind of run into a situation with our federal partners, and we've been trying to keep them writing along with us as we get feedback from our advisory groups of what folks wanted to see added to the purpose and need statement. We've just been trying to share drafts of what that infusion of equity and climate change language would look like. And as Greg and the prior discussion mentioned, the need statement is a very difficult place from a legal defensibility standpoint for the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration to defend, because as the National Environmental Policy Act is a very procedural act, and so gets challenged on process. But we still have the critical objectives and the vision and values that don't have that similar legal constraint that the purpose and need does. And so we have more flexibility and more opportunity to concentrate our efforts there to bring in the elements that are important to this group. So this slide is just showing that, that we received input from their committees on these 3 elements, documents. We developed working language, and we've been sharing that with our partners, our federal partners. If we go to the next slide, please. What we heard specifically from this group in terms of integrating equity is looking for opportunities to avoid further harm, be future focused on our aspirations, and pay particular attention on any implications for low-income community members, looking for improvement in transportation options, for example, as well as, so there's options and opportunities, as well as mitigating for adverse impacts. Go to the next slide. There's a couple more key points, which is really to look at opportunities to strengthen communities now and into the future, as well as public transportation was identified as one of the most important needs of the program to improve transportation options for non-drivers. We'll go to the next one. Great. So in terms of how we can apply equity into NEPA, again, the National Environmental Policy Act, a federal law that sets up a process for evaluating and disclosing environmental impacts to the community and the environment, which is encapsulated in this project as an environmental impact statement and the decision, which is, as we mentioned earlier, the record of decision. But beyond that, as we move into advancing the design, finalizing design elements, moving into construction and all of the procurement and actual construction activities, as well as further monitoring for accountability. So, for example, making sure that we engage a broad range of voices during the planning and decision-making process, identifying performance measures so that we can make sure that design elements reflect the ideas, the problems that we want to solve into the ultimate solution. Another element is being able to commit to specific processes or outcomes, and to make sure that we are analyzing the benefits and impacts of the program on the community and the environment. So those are all ways that are still have a lot of flexibility for us to look at ways to benefit and provide more equitable a more equitable solution to this program. So on this slide, a lot of text. This is the critical objective for equity. Whoops. That we have right now. And this has been informed by some of the discussions we've had with this group, we've had with our executive steering group and our citizen advisory group. I will just kind of quickly run through this, and then I believe we are going to open it up for more discussion that Roberta will facilitate, of looking at wording, anything that we're missing, how we want to maybe change it or revise it, because we want to continue to refine this objective as we move forward. So what we have right now is commit to equity on both outcomes and processes through the delivery of the program, ensure historically marginalized communities have meaningful access to program activities, jobs, and other program benefits, minimize transportation costs for historically marginalized communities associated with the program, ensure access to program benefits while minimizing impacts to historically marginalized and underserved communities, including neighborhoods adjacent to the program area. Consider historical impacts to Black, Indigenous people, or Indigenous and people of color, as well as economically vulnerable populations when determining equitable outcomes for the program. Engage historically marginalized communities to ensure program design reflects a cultural context and area history. Provide meaningful opportunities for women and minority-owned firms, including disadvantaged business enterprises, in all procurement. Minimize displacements within communities of concern through design. And enhance transportation and public transit access to jobs, services, affordable housing, and housing choice relevant to historically marginalized communities. A lot of information packed in there. As Jake mentioned, the document that contains this language was sent out last week as part of the agenda packet. So Dr. Hunt, I'll turn it over to you at this point. I think the next slide has our questions. So maybe we should go to that one really quick, and then maybe we come back so people can see the wording again.
All right. Hi, everybody. So maybe we're going to talk for about the next 15 minutes or so. And if you want to just quickly jot down these group discussion questions. Number one, do you have proposed changes to any of the draft critical objectives? And two, is there anything missing from the draft critical objectives? So maybe do we want to come back and put up that refining the equity critical objective slide? And I'll just keep coming back to the questions. Proposed changes to this draft language. Is there anything missing?
So Dr. Hunt, if I could make one comment.
Yes.
These are probably the 1,000-foot level of critical objectives. Eventually, we're going to work these down into very, very much actionable, measurable items. So as you review these, know that we're gonna start talking about how we contract this program to meet some of these objectives. That'll be a granular goal and objective that we will meet that's spelled out, that's very clear. We will talk about how training programs for pre-apprenticeships and apprenticeship programs, those will be some of the specific outcomes that get down to the 100-foot, the 10-foot, the 5-foot level of these critical objectives. So just wanted to clarify that point.
I'll also add real quick just that this discussion is also going to feed into our discussion of the equity framework, where we're going to be looking at measurable outcomes. So just to connect those dots.
Sabrina?
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Greg. Can you, so understanding that these are not the specific outcomes that we're going to get to, can you either say or reiterate then what do the critical objectives get used for, or what will they be referenced for, or what will they inform then?
So the critical objectives, as we develop these as the umbrella critical objectives, then eventually we will start digging down into ground level things as to internships. What kind of training folks need to participate? What type of support will DBE and small business enterprises need? So this is just the first step to start taking us down to lower levels, to on the ground things that can happen, that will be part of the environmental document and will be measurable. They may serve to, if we go with a value-based selection, they may serve as the basis of some of the values by which a bidding contractor would be evaluated on. So these are key critical to how this thing, the outcomes of this program will look.
And Greg, I would just add to this is, as a critical objective, this is a requirement. This is a commitment that we are making that a solution would be required to achieve. So these are our objectives. And as you mentioned, we will establish performance measures in order to be able to assess the success of achieving these objectives.
Thank you.
Caitlin?
Hi, thanks. I was kind of going back and forth, was raising my hand because that was maybe answering the question, but it might still be worth asking in light of the update that you, Greg and Angela were sharing. Will these bullets and critical objectives be able to, will the program team be able to take these into account as they develop the alternatives? Or is it envisioned that they will primarily be used for kind of screening? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand the question. I think these will be a part of anything that goes forward. So no matter what design is chosen, what design refinements we put in place, these objectives and then the more granular outcomes that we derive from these will be a part of what goes forward in the document. In some documents, they're called enhanced mitigation. So there's different names for it, but once again, there's a commitment to do these things no matter what this bridge looks like physically. These things will be a part of the commitment to move forward.
Are we able to add to these as we are going through more details? I know that sometimes when you go into depth, you can see that there need to be alterations or there need to be additions. And so I'm just curious if this needs to be a hard stop or if this is a living document.
So, and I am not the NEPA expert, but I'm going to say that this is a living document. We're going to be adding granular pieces through this until we get the final document approved. And we still will have opportunities even beyond that as we get into contracting to add even more pieces that we may have missed or new things that may have developed in other parts of the country that we may be interested in including in this project. So I agree with you. This is a living document until we get a final record of decision for this.
I would agree with that, Greg. Is we are trying to identify as much as we can at this point so that we can use it as early in the process as possible. But sometimes, another item will bubble up that we hadn't thought of until we get further along. So we will continue to add or adjust as needed.
So in essence, there will be plenty bites at the apple as we move this forward.
Lily?
Thank you. This is Lily. So are you asking for feedback on it now? I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, yes. Relative to the two questions, if we can scroll back to the two questions again, because I know we've kind of, so relative to these two questions, Lily.
Do you have proposed changes to any of the draft critical objectives? And 2, is there anything missing from the draft critical objectives?
Okay, thank you. If I can keep going, to me, these objectives are sort of a bulleted version of the equity statement that many of us found to be lacking. So I guess I would say that I am very interested in not just talking about access. So I think that going beyond access is missing. I think everything in here, that's not totally true, but almost everything in here is process related. And so if if the critical objectives are intended to be the framework through which outcomes are going to be measured, if I'm understanding the purpose of this correctly, it sounded like the outcomes will be measured against these critical objectives. And I don't see a lot of outcome related statements here. So it's very similar to the concerns that I had about the original equity statement. And I guess I would put a lot of the same comments that I'm adding to the equity statement to these equity objectives. And actually, to that point, I don't know how they're different. How is the equity statement different than the equity critical objectives? Maybe that would help.
Angela, did you want to weigh in, or would you like me to?
Yeah, if you could go ahead and start and I'll add on as needed, Johnell, that'd be great.
Yeah, so in some ways they may be similar in terms of word use. I think when you say statement, are you referring to the draft definition, Lily?
Yes, I am. Thank you for
clarifying. So I would say I think the definition attempts to get out a much sort of more macro sort of language in terms of how the program will define equity, whereas the critical objectives is attempting to look at specific things under each of those categories. So for example, providing meaningful opportunities for women and minority-owned firms. That's not something that's referenced in the definition. So that would be one way to answer it. And so what we're really looking to get from all of you is that exact kind of feedback is what should the language from your perspective be as we're thinking. The way to think about critical objectives also are sort of overarching umbrellas. The themes that we want to ensure that the program achieves. And as Greg indicated earlier, under each of those themes, we'll have very specific performance measures. So in some instances, it might make sense to consolidate so that perhaps we don't have as many, maybe we only have 3 to 4 thematics, and under each we have very specific performance measures that we'll want to see, because ultimately we are going to want to have something that all of you can kind of help to hold the program accountable to. Does that answer the question, Lily?
That's very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, Matthew Sears.
Yeah, so I just had some observations just looking over the critical objectives right now. So I think that generally speaking, the critical objectives could probably use more language specific to persons with disabilities and to that community of concern. When I look at, for example, that first bullet point when it says, commit to equity of both outcomes and processes throughout the delivery of the program. I think that there could be, equity is a very broad term, but I feel like it could say something more like commit to equity of both outcome, and there should be, like, when you're talking about processes, there should be accessibility to those processes, ensuring that those processes themselves are accessible for persons with disabilities. And maybe you could say that that's somehow encompassed under the word equity, but I feel like it could be more specific. I think a lot of these bullet points also turn on your definition of historically marginalized communities. So I think I would like to see an actual definition of historically marginalized communities in the document that includes persons with disabilities and recognizes that they are also a historically marginalized community. In terms of minimizing transportation costs, if you include persons with disabilities in that definition of historically marginalized communities, you may not need to do this, but I think that it could include minimizing transportation costs for persons with disabilities more specifically. I'm not sure entirely what is encompassed by the phrase economically vulnerable populations. So that's just more a question than a recommendation. And then on the second, well, on the bullet point with regard to opportunities for businesses, or earlier when it talks, I think at some point it talks about jobs. But particularly on the bullet point that says engage, provide meaningful opportunities for women and minority-owned business firms, I would like to see that to also include disability-owned businesses. I think that it's sometimes could be encompassed by the phrase disadvantaged business enterprise, but I'd like to see that there be benchmarks set not only for women and minority-owned firms, but also for firms or vendors that are disability-owned.
Excellent recommendations. Thank you
Awesome
for
comments.
that, Matt.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Matt Hines.
Hi, everyone. This is Matt Hines. So I would just echo what Matt just said, because I pretty much had the same feedback. I'd like to see disability actually highlighted as much as the other marginalized communities that were mentioned, and also the advantages that are going to be, benefits that are going to be sought for the disability communities. Also, I'd like to emphasize more understanding of what accessibility means, rather than just talking about access. Accessibility is also just as important in what that means to the disability community versus just the term access. So those are the couple of pieces of feedback I had.
Thank you. Steve Nakana.
Thank you. I totally agree with what some of my colleagues have indicated over there. And I think one way of getting at that is actually having a tight definition of our target groups that we are talking about. So when we are talking about marginalized communities, who is in and who's out, because we might be assuming that we are leaving people out, because I would assume that under people with disabilities or persons with disabilities, you find white folks and Black folks with disabilities. So if we have to call out folks with disabilities, can we have a standard definition of who we actually mean, so that we are not trying to almost come back and forth on who we are trying to make sure benefits here? Because from my understanding, when I read this, is people that have been left out. Doesn't matter if you're Black or white. If you've been left out and you're Black or white, you need to benefit from this. So if this is what we mean, and this is my assumption, then can we actually have a nice tight definition that indicates whom we are talking about when we are throwing these terms together? Thank you.
Great point. And Roberta, if I can just interject real quick, I'm wondering if our subcommittee that's working on the definition, if they could work to define historically marginalized as a program. We have some thoughts on that, which includes Title VI and EJ definitions. Of course, Title VI focused on minority, EJ focused on low income thresholds. But I think it would be worthwhile for us to specifically tease that out in our definition. So food for thought for our subcommittee working on the definition.
Sabrina, and then Caitlin.
Thank you. So I agree with a lot of what folks have already said. A few thoughts that came to mind for me. I'm thinking about the intersection of equity and climate, and whether I don't see environmental impact or burden here. I think the second thing I was thinking of is when we talk about economic opportunity, There's definitely the important part about, you know, minority owned and firms participation. But I'm wondering if we want to draw out jobs a little bit more. It's in the second bullet, but I think a more emphasis on that economic opportunity as well. There's two places where there's a negative, or it's not a negative. Minimize transportation costs and minimize displacement. I doesn't communicate a lot about what we want to see. And I'm wondering if there's a more affirmative way to say either one of those, whether it's about affordability, increased affordability, that could serve as an umbrella for other outcomes that could be measurable, community stability or something in place of displacement. And then kind of the last thing, similar, since we're talking about these being umbrella for measurable outcomes, the engaged historically marginalized communities. I don't know that the engagement is the goal. It's like I think that there's something a little bit beyond that, and the points of engagement are a measure of how we're doing toward that impact on decision making. But I think that there's perhaps a further push we could make on that objective there.
Caitlin.
Thanks. Yeah, this is Caitlin, Ref. So I had actually very similar to what Sabrina just shared. My first comment was going to be that I felt environmental justice or climate impacts may be missing, as you know, some of the other specific issues are called out. So whether that be, if we want to get as specific to kind of naming them or just in general speak to environment, but certainly air quality, water quality, tree canopy, and there are probably more. But yeah, I think what Sabrina said also is spot on to what I was thinking. And similarly with those two bullets that minimize transportation costs and minimize displacement, I think for the minimize transportation costs, potentially a way to do that, to flip that, because I agree, the way it's currently written could be challenging in terms of how it's measured. And to Steve Nakana's point, you know, without that specificity of who for, could become problematic, but maybe a more positive way to say that is in terms of what we want. So, you know, provide affordable housing and transportation options for, then specifically state who we're talking about. So yeah, I think that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and I guess I think what's one thing that's rattling around in my head is Sabrina. So when you were saying engage historically marginalized communities, that's not enough. Is it incorporate the perspectives of historically marginalized communities around program design and cultural context and in history? I mean, there's a lot there, right? So it goes a couple places, but I think what you're saying is don't just talk to them, like that these communities need to be part of the envisioning of design.
I think so, yes.
Okay, great. All right, I want us to, after Lily, I want us to shift gears, and we're gonna keep going with what you all are putting down. We're just gonna make a space for Chris Lepe to share with us about equity frameworks. Lily, do you want to speak quickly?
Sorry, real quick. I just really want to emphasize what Sabrina said, and say that just bringing people to the table is not what I hope happens here. I hope that there's actual decision-making power and influence we're trying to build that into the equity definition, and I really think that needs to be encapsulated in all of these processes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we have a new member, which is very exciting. Alicia Sojourner is joining us from the city of Vancouver. Alicia, would you like to just very briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. My name is Alicia Sojourner, pronouns them and they. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Been with the City of Vancouver for a couple weeks now. I'm still physically in the City of Minneapolis in Minnesota, but will officially be part of the Pacific Northwest next month. So I'm looking forward to having these conversations, and right now I'm soaking all of this in. So thank you for allowing me to do so. And I look forward to the continued conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome. And what a way to come to the Pacific Northwest.
We had a messy bridge situation. We've had 2 messy bridge situations in Minnesota and one between us and Wisconsin. So kind of feel like that I've been down this rodeo once before.
Okay, welcome. All right, so now we're gonna work with Chris Lepe. Chris is gonna talk with us about developing a framework for equitable outcomes. And take it away, Chris.
Thank you very much. And welcome again, Alicia. Good to have another Minnesota in the house. My mother's from Minnesota originally. So, very excited to be with you guys today. As mentioned, I'm on the project team to assist with other things, or among other things, the development of an equity framework to help prevent disproportionate harm as part of this project, but also increase benefits for historically and currently marginalized communities. But the question is, how do we advance equity as part of this project? With the mixed record that we have in this industry within transportation as one arm of government, we need to explicitly show what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And so what are the steps that we're going to take? What are the goals, the objectives, the measurable outcomes that we will commit to? What are the questions we will ask ourselves along the way? Who, what, when, and how do we focus our engagement on? What does an equitable process that builds trust and transparency look like? And what are some foundational definitions related to the project and to equity, as was stated earlier, for example, in referring to, who are we referring to when we say historically marginalized communities? So these are just some of the questions we can ask when developing an equity framework. And already we're kind of, in prior weeks, we've been, or you all have been, kind of developing some of those baseline components, some elements of what a framework might include. As an example, the definition and the critical objective. And I know, we were just discussing kind of the difference between process-oriented objectives and metrics and outcome-oriented objectives and metrics. And so those are both kind of really important to include within a process like this or a project like this. And might be within a framework. So if we, are we on the next slide here? You can click to the next slide. Great. So what I'm going to talk about during the presentation is pretty simple. I'm going to give you guys a definition of frameworks and equity frameworks in particular, and share some examples that are out there. And then we're going to have lots of discussion, a lot of time for discussion around what do we need to do? How will we know that we've done a good job in terms of the process and the outcomes as it relates to this project? How should the framework be structured? What are some elements that we should be thinking about including? And so hopefully the next portions of this presentation will give you a little bit of food for thought. But I know many of you bring lots of experiences and examples to the table as well, which hopefully you will be sharing with us. So first and foremost, what is a framework? A framework is a set of ideas, rules, or beliefs from which something is developed or which decisions are based upon. It helps ensure policies and plans are developed, reviewed, amended, and applied in a consistent and transparent way and outline key responsibilities. An equity framework provides really a roadmap to achieving equity as it relates to a project or program, and can include equity goals of the project, equity definitions, the approach and organizing principles for addressing equity, and a set of actions or steps to achieve equitable outcomes. So one example that I thought I'd share is not even related to transportation. Sometimes it's nice to kind of break out of our little silos. This example is from Chicago, the Chicago Public Schools Equity Framework. And there's a couple of things that you might notice in terms of this diagram. One is their targeted approach, right? So they're focusing on those students that have the greatest needs, that are kind of furthest behind, and making sure that they're allocating resources, for example, to uplift those students. The other thing that is, I think, interesting or positive about this approach is that they've got multiple different kind of strategies or ways of being able to advance equity, right? So they're looking at resource equity, policies, they're looking at partnerships, and also at the individual scale as well, the personal level. If we go to the next slide, just a little bit more content from their framework. So they state that the framework helps to ground us in the values and the structures essential to doing the transformative, personal, relational, and institutional work. So they're talking about the institutional as well as the down to the personal level. And they also talk about the framework having its shared language, tools, and accountability measures. And again, sort of the emphasis on processes, initiatives, and outcomes. So both process and outcomes, which we'll be talking about more today. In regards to King County's Metro Mobility Framework, I think this is actually, if you get a chance to check it out, some of you might already be familiar with it, but they did a really extensive process and engaging the community around the development of this framework, but included robust research on mobility best practices, travel and demographic trends. And I thought what was really good is that they included guiding principles and recommendations in different buckets. So you can see here they have investments, land use, innovation, workforce, and engagement with much more fine-grained principles and recommendations bridging off of that. And then finally, also they have, importantly, discussion around implementation strategies. What does implementation look like? The other example that I wanted to share with you today is not a framework, but it's a toolkit. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the City of Portland's Racial Equity Toolkit. The City of Seattle also has a really good toolkit as well that I recommend reviewing. And so, one thing that's really good about these toolkits is they have these steps to take along the way, and often key questions to help ensure that projects are steered towards equitable outcomes. And I won't go over the details here, but for example, they have setting the equitable outcomes, which is kind of a process that we're going through right now with this project, collecting and analyzing data, understanding the historical context, which has already been noted today by some of the comments, and so on and so forth, right? If you go to the next slide, one of the reports that I was personally involved with contributing to is Transform's Pricing Roads Advancing Equity Reporting Toolkit. So this is in relation to congestion pricing projects and programs, but I think a lot of the steps, for example, and the questions to ask and the outcomes can be applied to non-pricing projects as well, such as IBR. So they group one of the key things, one of the communiques they group in terms of equity outcomes. They focus on the outcomes piece, on affordability, access to opportunity, and community health, but then also the participation, so both process and outcomes. And then finally, they have these 5 steps to achieving equitable outcomes, starting from identification of who are we talking about, where do these populations live, what is the project in relation to these populations of concern. And you can see sort of multiple steps that kind of mirror the Portland Racial Equity Toolkit in some ways, kind of similar there. And so, similar to the Portland example, they have specific example questions that could be posed along the ways, as well as example indicators and performance measures. So that's this next slide here that gives you a few different examples of the kinds of questions that one might ask. So for example, the last question there in step 5, how heavily will decision makers weigh the adopted equity outcomes and indicators relative to other priorities? And I'll just leave this here for you to scan for a few seconds.
Hey, Chris, could you read these questions?
Sure, absolutely. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So as I mentioned, in the prior diagram, they had 5 steps, right? So for each step, they have a series of questions as examples that one might pose. And so, step 1 during that kind of scoping process of identification of the populations of concern, are all potentially impacted and vulnerable populations within the project study boundaries? Or are there other populations, other individuals, other potentially impacted folks, outside of those boundaries? And the second step, will changes resulting from the project reduce traffic and bring more community cohesion, right? We know that the history of highway building often resulted in the opposite of community cohesion, social dislocation and whatnot. So might the changes as part of this project actually help bring about greater community cohesion? Step 3, which is, if I go back, is determining benefits and burdens. So this is the sort of the assessment process. So just one example would be, what impacts will pricing have on air quality, and where are these impacts likely to be felt? I'll make a quick note that a lot of times when we're thinking about indicators, we might bump into granularity of data and availability of data. And so that's something that, as part of this process, we'll have to juggle with and kind of deal with. But nonetheless, I think one of the prior comments was, hey, what about air quality and the health measures? Well, you can incorporate those kind of things as part of these kind of projects. Step 4, what strategies will most help commuters and also non-commuters, right? Not just the folks that are getting around to their jobs, but the folks that are perhaps not using the bridge, but living in the communities nearby. What strategy will most help commuters and non-commuters from vulnerable communities? So these are just a few examples of the kinds of questions that we can ask at each step of the process. If we go to the next slide, also read these out for you. So these are example indicators from the toolkit as well. So with full participation, an example of an indicator that we could pose is number of community identified priorities that are being implemented as part of the program. So are there any existing community priorities that have been identified within this geography that we can say, hey, look, these are the things that we're called for, and we're kind of infusing them within this program or this project. On affordability, the change in share of household income spent on transportation and housing by income category. In terms of access to opportunity, change in the number of jobs and number of jobs or services that people from vulnerable communities can access within a 30, 45, or 60-minute window by mode. And then finally, community health, the change in particulate matter or other criteria pollutants in identified impact areas. So these again are just a few examples. Feel free to check out the report, and there's other good resources too that we can share with you as this process moves forward to help inform the conversation. And if any of you have any, I'll just kind of leave it on one final note. If any of you have any additional frameworks or toolkits that you really love, feel free to share them with the project team, so that can also inform the development of our framework moving forward. So with that, we'll kick it off to discussion. And Roberta, did you want to open it up for any questions, clarifying questions, or should we go straight to the breakout rooms?
We can do 9 minutes of clarifying questions, and then we need to go to breakout rooms. and we will have our discussions there. But how about before we go, would anyone, does anyone have a comment or a question for Chris directly?
Roberta, real quick, we just so we make sure we have time for a report out, we should probably move sooner rather than later into the breakouts.
Okay. All right.
Not to say we can't answer a question.
Sorry.
All right. Questions, feedback for Chris? Okay, great. Great.
Oh, we got one hand.
One hand. All right.
Sorry. Chris, this is really helpful for me. And I really like the examples that you've shown and the way that you've shown how this process can be implemented. And it just makes me think that the development of the critical objectives and the equity definition and this equity framework really, I am excited for a process in which all three of those things are designed at the same time. It seems to me like to try to do them in isolation is a not awesome option. And I think if we could do all three in sort of a coordinated way, that would be really cool. But I look forward to checking out the reports that you've listed. So thanks for providing references.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're welcome. And definitely all the work that you guys have already done as part of this process, that's going to feed in beautifully into the framework, right? So from what I can tell, at least from my side of things, it's all in sync. So Roberta, do you want to kick it off to discussions? I'm sure we can. I'm sure we're kind of limited with time, but we can dig in deeper in the breakout groups.
Yeah. So let's do that. And I want to shorten the amount of time in the breakout rooms. Brent, can we do that?
Yes. How much time would you like to go into the breakout rooms?
So if we can go for 15 minutes.
Okay.
So everybody has, Brent is going to place you all into 3 breakout rooms, and there will be a facilitator in the room working with you on the Jamboard, and we have 2 questions for you all to answer in that 15 minutes. And our questions are really, how will we know we've done a good job in this project in terms of our processes and outcomes, right? So kind of continuing the conversations that we've been mining over this time right now, and thinking about, we're really kind of looking at this to help us move towards informing our framework, and thinking about what are the outcomes and what are some of the processes that we want to see to know that we've done a good job. All right, so Brent, if you will take us away for 15 minutes.
Opening all rooms now, and if you're jumping in via YouTube, you'll see something shortly that's interactive. Thank you to those who are joining us via YouTube. Our Equity Advisory Group members are in a breakout room. They will return shortly. If you would like to participate in an interactive activity, go to menti.com. That is menti.com and enter the code 6829676. And this is part of an interactive activity. But it's menti.com, menti.com, and code 62829676. Hi, Meg. Do you remember what room you're in?
I was in room 1. If I
Okay,
remember
let's get you
correctly.
back in there.
Thank you.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Oh, sorry.
It's never enough time for that robust discussion.
Why did he even do that? He was like, you're there. And then all of a sudden you're not there. I got kicked out. Why did I get kicked out?
Because you gave us 15 minutes.
15 minutes aren't over.
That's why. That's why. Yeah, it was 15 minutes. It went by fast.
It was not. It was not. Okay, fine. Okay.
At least we got the 2-minute warning this time, right?
There was no 2-minute warning.
No, not for you. I caught it.
Yeah, I saw it too.
Yeah, well, anyway. So where we were at in our robust conversation that was shut so quickly, let's report back. So what were some of the things that people wanted to really be sure that we hit? How about from the group that Sabrina was in? What are some things from that group that we really need to know around outcomes and process? How do we know we've done a good job?
Am I reporting back? I didn't know I was reporting back.
You don't have to, but somebody
Sorry.
should.
I was like, yeah, that's our group, Jake. Jake, did you want to, since you got the board there, the Jam board, did you want to report back or?
Yeah, I can offer a couple things that we talked about. So we definitely focused in terms of outcomes. We talked about a lot about workforce development and contracting and how that is done. We even talked about like looking at the responsibility of our contractors, like what policies they have in practice related to DEI and anti-harassment, things like that. We talked about looking at all communities that are affected by the bridge and whether they're better off, kind of figuring out how we might be able to measure that. Talked a lot about how we have some metrics related to people with disabilities and whether people are more mobile because of the bridge, environmental impacts related to geography, and of course, considering including outcomes for communities of color in all of our metrics. Those were the key around outcomes. Did I miss anything, group?
How about the next group, the group that I was not in?
Salome, did you want to report out for us?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So in our group, we had increase in ridership, see an increase in employment in marginalized communities in relation to the program, a decrease in travel time. We had a really enriching conversation about ensuring communities of concern have greater access to quality transit. For example, low-income communities having access to employment areas. And that was meant more in the geographical sense of their ability to get to and from work, or an increase in reliable transit to where they can have greater opportunities for employment. Another thought that got brought up was looking back well after the program is complete to see if our equity efforts actually led to equitable outcomes. One example of that would be looking back to, with this increase in reliable transit or increase in, I guess, modal transportation, would this actually end up being a situation in which someone might get priced out of their neighborhood because now it's desirable or more desirable? And did we make sure that we look at this well after the program is complete to make sure that it's not just a short-term benefit to those communities, but more of a long-term one?
Thank you. Thank you. How about for the group I was in? Jason, would you like to talk? May have stepped away.
I will certainly take a shot at it, and my group, please feel free to chime in. We first talked, had a great conversation and suggestion about have to be clear about our targeted outcomes, and can we truly measure what we were able to accomplish at the end of the day in terms of our targeted groups. And so I think I've also heard that as, you know, the program deliverables, and once it's been delivered, can we really measure what we were able to accomplish? Specific examples were talked about in contracting and environmental. On top of that, kind of a supplemental comment to that was, how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to the outcomes? We talked about one way to measure is at the end of the project, are people better off at completion? And is it the right people who are better off? And then we also, on the flip side of that, is being able to disaggregate who is worse off at the end, if somebody is, and again, holding ourselves accountable to those outcomes. Real quickly, we also talked about measuring accountability and success in terms of who was better off. I said that one already. Making sure there's excuse me. Be iterative evaluation of how the process is going. And then also Greg had a great comment of what data is needed and do we have enough data? And we continue to have a good conversation about that. So that covers my group.
Great. All right. So we have 2 minutes before public comment. Thoughts? Does something stand out for people? One thing that our group talked about is this thing around past harms, and can we line up past harms with our outcomes? And then also thinking around iterative evaluation around how the process is going. Yeah. All right. So we've done a lot of churning. We're going to stop for a minute and have public comment, and then we'll think of 3 takeaways that we're leaving today with. We've covered a lot of ground.
Real quickly, Roberta. So we had the option for the public who is viewing to participate in an exercise. We asked them how would we know we did a good job. And we got one comment that said people of all incomes and backgrounds can use the bridge and surrounding infrastructure effectively to move to and from where they want to go. So FYI there.
That's great. That's great. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Johnell, for a public comment.
Great. Brent, could you share with us if we have anyone who has signed up?
Looks like we have one person, and Todd, and he's joined by a Zoom. So he'll join and then he'll leave.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and just give instructions for our viewers. To make a live comment via phone, please dial 669-900-6833 or 408-638-0968. The meeting ID is 986-0940-5983, and the passcode is 701376. Dial *9 to raise your hand. We'll call on you once we see you in the queue. And when it's your turn to speak, please press *6 to unmute yourself. Please provide your name and affiliation. You'll receive 2 minutes. Next slide, please. You may also submit comment via writing. You can fill out a comment form on the program website or email your comment to info@interstatebridge.org. And if you can put EAG public comment in the subject line, you may also call and leave a voice message at 360-859-0494 or 503-897-9218. We also have a toll-free number at 1-888-503-6735. Please state in your voicemail that you're calling with respect to EAG public comment. Written comments need to explicitly say EAG public comment in the subject line or in the body of the message for them to be identified and distributed to the EAG members. All written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to advisory group members. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of their next meeting. So with that, I'm going to get my clock going, if you just bear with me here. Okay, Brent, we are ready. If you could. Brent, if you could tell us how many commenters we have.
We just have the one.
Okay.
Looks like they're trying to join via audio, but they might be experiencing difficulties. So Todd, if you can hear me now, you can join via audio and ask your question. Looks like he's not joined via audio though. And still not able to start. Let's see. Looks like Todd has left, so we don't actually have a public comment today.
I'm here.
Johnell. Oh, there he is. Hi, Todd.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Todd.
Hi.
Todd,
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and start your time now.
Go. Okay. My name is Todd Bachman. I'm a resident of Vancouver, and I've been listening on your meetings for most of them, and I haven't heard you guys mention when you in terms of equitable access or equity, in terms of equity to natural landscape. And that's one thing I want you guys to consider, that the bridge provides a opportunity for the region to access the river, the topography of our region that we connect with, and nature. I know it's sort of hard to understand, but if you have had an opportunity to walk down that sidewalk and you can sort of filter out the cars that are 10 feet away from you, like a day like today, if you looked east, you would have noticed one of the best views that we have in our region. And I think there's something really important for us to provide to our community, that access. So when you think about what we're doing and the equitable access, it's not just to get over the bridge, but it's to experience our region and the nature that it provides. And I haven't heard you guys talk about that. If you have, I apologize, but I have been sitting in, and that's something I would really like you guys to consider. I've got 45 seconds left. One thing is just an example, condo, a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom condo on the Vancouver side by Marine Park just sold for $2.5 million. This is a 3rd floor condo. And it just shows you, I think part of why it is expensive is because of the view, and it shouldn't be relegated to those who can afford it. And so I just think that's one element of equity that I would like you guys to consider. That's it.
Thank you, Todd, for that comment. Brent, do we have any others?
There is no one else in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Roberta, I'm turning it back over to you.
All right, so we have a short time to wrap up. So can we have 3 takeaways from our time together? So anyone can share one, but can we just get at least 3? Something that you are taking away from our time.
This is Matt.
Yep.
I think it's great that we've all kind of collectively established that we want to see qualitative and quantitative data to inform our outcomes and processes for each stakeholder and marginalized group that has experienced harm or lack of access in the past.
Great, thanks, Matt. 2. How about you, Karen? What's something you're taking away?
I was actually just thinking about, I don't know if it's just kind of where I'm processing things at, but when asked the question about how will we know that we've done a good job, the first thing that comes to mind after sitting in on different types of equity boards is when we stop having the same discussion for multiple years, I think we'll know that we've done a good job.
Slam dunk. Yeah. How about you, Meg?
More than anything, I'm so continually excited that we have the ability to have these conversations and to actually make some change about how the bridge will be constructed and the further benefits that people will be seeing in the future. And having written language down that says this is how we're going to see those benefits for everyone involved. I like having those numbers attached. I apologize for my dog in the background, by the way.
Great, thank you. All right, one more voice.
This is Rebecca. And your apologies, you're going to hear my cat screaming in the background. But one thing that our conversation in the small group, reminded me of, and I've continued to reflect on through this project, is that this project can do a lot, but it can only do so much. And as we, look to try to make the region more equitable and to mitigate against some of the negative impacts of investments that we know can follow them or come with them, we really have to, as a region and as partners, work together to stand up the other programmatic and other investments we need to make to ensure that, one thing we talked about in our group was we can make transit access a lot better. We can make it more reliable, more comfortable, fewer transfers. But do we then inadvertently push the folks out that we want to benefit from that transit? And what else do we need to do that is not part of this project, but needs to be done to make the investments we're making through this project as part of this equity work actually equitable over the long term? And I think that's a challenge that our region faces, and we're going to have to continue to work on. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, if we can have the slide with our date and time of our next gathering. Will be April 19th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. and where we will be talking more about our equity framework and potential adoption of our equity definition. And for you just to mark your calendars for May 17th, 5:30 to 9:30, we will be together again. So we'll see you April 19th, 5:30 to 7:30. And we are closing.
Sorry, I had closed the presentation.
That's great, Jake. That's great. Johnell, do you want to say anything more?
I just want to thank everyone for your robust conversation. If you have additional thoughts, particularly as it relates to performance measures, please send those to us via email. We are wanting to integrate as much of your feedback as we possibly can at this early stage. And so again, thank you. Greg, did you have any final words?
Just another thank you. As we ride the rapids of this program, folks were able to shift gears with us and look at those critical objectives. So I think this is going to be where the action is at. And this is going to be where you're going to be able to insert yourself and your views into some actionable things. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Yeah, be well.
Yeah, bye.
Night, everybody.